What's going on, everybody? Gunnar here, and today we're not going to tie anything. We're just going to talk, and we're going to talk about hooks. So basically, I just had somebody ask me, they sent me a drawing of a fly they were working on, and they were like, they detailed out where the hook was and where they put their weight, and they're like, why is this swimming upside down? And it was quite a simple little tweak to get it to ride right, but I just thought, why not talk about hooks, right? So basically, there's kind of like 4 things you got to consider, and they apply to kind of each different style of fly. And so I kind of think, big picture wise, there's like articulating flies, bulk up front, slick behind, that swims in a nest, right? There's jerk flies, they go off to the side like jerk baits. There's jig flies, obviously, up, down, you know what I'm saying? And then there's kind of weightless swim bug, like Swimmy Jimmies and Sids and D&Ds and Kelly's Fat Heads and Zoo Cougars and stuff like that. So you kind of have those like 4 styles, and each one kind of has its own different hook idea, property, thingy-mabobbers that you might want to consider. So this is obviously my opinion. Take it or leave it, but here we go. So basically I have a ginormous 6-aught right here just so that we can talk, I suppose. Basically, when you have a hook like this and you kind of just throw it in the water, it's going to sink willy-nilly. As soon as you start stacking materials on the hook shank, you now build an axis that is displacing water that the gap in wire thickness can act on as a moment force, which will effectively keel the hook, right? So as soon as you start tying material on here, basically that hook keel starts to act. It's kind of just like, you think about a sailboat, it displaces water, you put a big heavy mass below it, it keels. Kind of simple, right? So when you think about a hook, basically all you have is wire thickness, right? And that's just your basic mass of the overall hook. And then you can displace that wire thickness from the axis of rotation, which is where you just, you tie all your materials on, and that acts basically as the moment force around that axis. No, okay, so I have a lot of ideas, and I gotta try to keep on track here or else I'm gonna get lost. So basically, the mass of the hook is gonna provide 2 things. It's gonna provide momentum, which is gonna come in play, I guess, later, and it's gonna provide an impulse. Now, I don't know the definition of impulse. I kind of forgot because it's been a while since I took physics, but we're going to basically define it as the force needed to displace an object in space. You know what I'm saying? So the heavier a hook is, the thicker the wire, basically, the greater impulse you're going to need to displace that hook. So when you look at an articulating style bug, this is just a little sculpin pattern, you put this weight, or you put the viscosity up front, you have more materials up front. Well, that back hook, you want to choose a nice light wire back hook because it's going to have a lower impulse. So when this front hook is pushing water, right, it's basically water's hitting that head, it's being displaced around that head, and it's coming back and hitting this tail. The lighter wire hook is going to have a lower impulse, it's going to have more movement. Now, as soon as you release tension from this, you're jerk stripping, as soon as you release tension, basically that back hook, which has less friction on it, is going to accelerate into that front hook, which is slowing down, and the back hook articulates, right? You get this kind of S movement every time your fly stops. That's why you want a light back hook. Now your front hook, you pair it based on basically shank length and gap for your head design so that you have nice proportions, in my opinion. Now as soon as you go to a jerk style fly, here's a super jerk, right? As soon as you move to that style, I no longer consider impulse a factor. Instead, I'm concerned solely with momentum, right? So when you talk about a jerk style fly, as soon as you release tension, there's nothing propelling that fly through the water except momentum, which has everything to do with your hook wire thickness, right? Everything. And it also has to do with how slippery you build the head and what materials you use to create your silhouette, because you don't want a lot of friction, right? Which is going to impact the momentum that the fly has. It's going to de-accelerate it. But basically, this is a 2-aught Predator Stinger hook, and I have a 2-aught Attitude Streamer in the back. And someone asked me one time, they're like, why is your back hook so big? It's not going to move as well, right? And they're thinking in the articulated style, and they're totally right. But this fly, the back hook on a jerk fly, an articulated jerk fly, the back hook doesn't articulate around the front hook. The front hook articulates away from the back hook. You know what I'm saying? That jerk, that sail that you build on a jerk fly, which is vertically displaced, it's thin and it's keeled, right, which has to do with the hook gap. That front fly is going to articulate away from the back fly. So as soon as you add a back hook, what you're adding is momentum behind that fly. So as that front hook articulates away, that back hook, being a really big 2-aught medium thickness wire hook, is able to push that front hook, and you get a substantial jerkbait action, right? Which is why on a fly like the Jerk Junior, it's tied on a 1-aught Attitude Extra, which is like a quadruple thick wire hook, because I'm trying to build momentum into a very small fly. I need a heavy mass on a very small fly so that when I strip that, it jerks. If you take like a Firefly, which I don't have out, right, that's the same size as a Jerk Junior, but it's tied on a curved Gammarus hook, really short shank, relatively decent gap, but it's a thin wire hook. I basically wouldn't be able to get that hook to jerk. It doesn't have enough mass. So instead of building a slim vertical head, I just put a fish mask on it to help displace a little bit of water, and it's kind of just a little darter bug, right? So it has a completely, you change the hook, you change the action completely, right? So now we're going to move into jig flies. So jig flies, this is a wiggle tail eye candy, obviously designed to ride hook up. Now, not all jig flies are designed to ride hook up, but if I were to do it, I probably would. But anyway, so in order to get a hook to ride up, we'll just focus on that for now, you need to put more weight on the underside of the hook keel. You need to offset the mass that hook keel has. And I forgot to mention this, but the distance, right? The distance you put the gap basically controls how effective that bug is at keeling. So this displacement of the mass, your wire thickness, your mass, as you displace that farther away from the hook shank, it has a stronger keel force. Does that make sense? Just like a sailboat, the longer the keel is, the more effective it is. So you need to offset the mass of your hook gap with lead eyes or lead or however you weight your fly or sculpin helmet or something like that. So when you're talking about inverting a hook, it makes sense to use either a thinner wire hook or a smaller hook gap. It's going to have less keel force, and you're going to be able to invert it with less weight. The other thing to consider is bending the hook eye up. So when you bend the hook eye up, you change the point of attachment, right? So if you look at like a ball jig from the spin gear world, right, there's nothing to orient that except for where you attach it, and it's pointed up. If that jig were to sink upside down and you add tension to it, it's going to flip up, right? Because the attachment's up, and you put weight below the attachment point. Similarly to the eye candy, we move the attachment point from in line with the hook, or in line with our lead eyes, and we put it above the lead eyes. So now that mass is below the attachment point, effectively keeling that bug. Now if you wanted to use lighter weight, if you wanted to use small lead eyes, you wanted to use brass eyes, you wanted to play around with that weighting system because maybe you have smaller water or you need to get deeper, whatever, you can basically affect the effectiveness of the eyes, by the distance you bend that shank. So consider just the hook gap, right? The hook gap, the size of the gap impacted the keel. Likewise, the distance that you bend the shank up impacts the keel from your mass being below the attachment point. So if you want to say use a lighter weight, instead of bending 1 or 2 hook eyes worth of shank, bend 3, bend 3.5, right? If you're going to use heavier eyes, maybe you only have to bend it 1 eye. So whatever you're doing, just consider that you can change the effectiveness of the weight simply by bending that hook eye up at a set distance or at a set angle, move it from 60 to 90 so that you move that attachment point, creating a greater moment force on that axis or point of attachment. You know what I'm saying? Okay, what am I at? 9 minutes? Oh my gosh. Lastly, swim bugs. So most swim bugs, this is a skinny dipper, right, which has a super flat, low profile head. Swim bugs, designed opposite from at least mine is, designed opposite from a jerk fly, is designed to stabilize. That flat head displaces water and it wants to stabilize. So basically you can throw wire thickness kind of out the window. You don't have to worry about the keel force because the design of the head is what is going to control how that fly rests. And you just need to offset it with, say, a 1/0, medium thin wire, whatever you want to do, so that it doesn't land upside down. But basically you control that it rides that way. And I would consider this to be an articulating style where I want a thin back hook, which is going to have a lower impulse and is going to have better movement. So hopefully that made sense. It was a lot going on in my head, so I don't know if it got all out on the page, and I see myself moving my hands like crazy during this video. A little embarrassing. So, quick recap. Articulating flies. Thin wire, smaller back hook, less impulse. Makes sense. Also, obviously, hooks in general, they have a certain mass. It's basically based off wire thickness. You attach materials, you create an axis of rotation. The larger the gap, the thicker the wire, the stronger the keel. That's straightforward, right? Jerk fly, you want a thicker wire hook. It adds momentum to carry that fly off into its direction. When you articulate it, you want to create a low or a high impulse back hook so that instead of articulating, it adds momentum to push the front hook off. Likewise, if you build a single hook jerk fly, consider using a thicker, heavier wire. It's going to help action that bug. Jig flies, right? You need to offset the keel force from your hook gap with weight on the opposite side. These lead eyes are on the bottom side, I guess the top of the hook shank, theoretically, and you can affect the effectiveness of the eyes by bending the hook shank up, putting the mass below your attachment point, right? Swim bugs, basically they're designed to stabilize with a flat head, right? That's another thing that the mallard flank wings on zoo cougars and heifer groomers do. They stabilize. They're a nice wide cupped wing that displaces water, so they stabilize, right? So you can kind of get away with thinner wires, but you still want a sufficient gap, obviously, because they're a big bulky head, but also so that fly lands correctly and not upside down, and that has a thin back hook as well. So those are my thoughts on hooks. Take it or leave it, and let me know if that helped you out at all, or if you have any questions, let them rip. See ya.